The private jet's cabin exuded luxury, but the atmosphere was anything but serene. A prominent political figure, Claudia Miller, had settled into her seat expecting a peaceful journey to the Maldives, a chance to escape the relentless pressures of her public life. However, what unfolded next turned her dream of a tranquil retreat into a waking nightmare. From the moment she stepped on board, Claudia sensed something was off. The sharp stares, the whispers from the flight crew, and the deliberate coldness of one attendant, Lily, created an air of hostility that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a bad day or a simple misunderstanding. This was personal. As the flight progressed, the tension mounted. What started as curt remarks and frosty glances soon escalated into an open confrontation, with Lily questioning Claudia's right to be on the plane. And then came the announcement. An emergency landing at a desolate airport without apparent explanation. Little did Claudia know, this was just the beginning of a shocking ordeal that would expose not just individual prejudice, but a deeply entrenched system of discrimination and abuse of power. Before we dive into this gripping story of injustice, resilience, and triumph, comment below with where you're watching from today. If you're already intrigued by Claudia's fight for justice and the powerful lessons it holds, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more stories like this. Claudia Miller stepped aboard the private jet, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit that radiated professionalism. After weeks of exhaustive meetings and back-to-back public appearances, she yearned for solitude. This trip to the Maldives, a tropical paradise she had always dreamed of, promised a much-needed break to recharge and find peace. The jet's interior epitomized luxury. Buttery leather seats, soft ambient lighting reflecting off sleek wooden panels, and an atmosphere as serene as a high-end hotel in the clouds. Claudia placed her leather briefcase in the overhead compartment, exhaled deeply, and settled into her seat. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to relax. As she leaned back, her thoughts drifted. This journey wasn't just a getaway. It felt like a symbol of her perseverance through endless personal and professional challenges. Claudia had always been a fighter, someone who didn't just survive adversity but used it as fuel to rise. A voice broke her reverie. "Good afternoon, welcome aboard. Bookmark, go back." Claudia glanced up to see a flight attendant standing a few rows ahead. The woman, whose name tag read Lily, had blonde hair neatly tied in a bun and a polished demeanor. Her voice was sweet, professional, and friendly as she greeted other passengers, but something shifted when her eyes landed on Claudia. There was a pause, brief but noticeable. The warm smile Lily had worn moments earlier faltered, replaced by something more challenging to read. Claudia, with her sharp instincts, caught the subtle change immediately. She offered a polite nod and returned her gaze to the book she had brought along. Lily's smile returned as she greeted the next passenger, yet the faint tension lingered. Claudia couldn't help but wonder, was it a fleeting moment, or was there more to this reaction? Soon, Lily disappeared into the galley, where she exchanged whispers with another flight attendant. Their hushed voices and occasional glances in Claudia's direction stirred a faint unease. But Claudia dismissed the thought. She had encountered countless microaggressions throughout her life, which she decided wasn't worth dwelling on yet. The cabin filled with the hum of passengers settling into their seats. Claudia opened her book, but before she could get past the first sentence, she felt someone watching her. Glancing across the aisle, her eyes met those of a young woman with long, dark hair. "I'm Sarah," the woman said softly, leaning slightly toward her. Claudia offered a kind smile. "Nice to meet you." Sarah hesitated for a moment as if debating whether to say more. Finally, she leaned back in her seat, opened her laptop, and began typing. Claudia took a moment to study her discreetly. She seemed thoughtful, curious even, but not unfriendly. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Lily returned to the cabin, distributing beverages and ensuring passengers were comfortable. Her professional charm flowed effortlessly until she reached Claudia's row. "Here's your drink," Lily said abruptly, setting down a glass of water with a sharp clink that broke the stillness. Her voice was devoid of the warmth she had shown the other passengers. Claudia raised an eyebrow, but responded graciously, "Thank you." Lily didn't reply. She turned on her heel and walked away, her demeanor once again professional as she attended to others. Across the aisle, Sarah looked up from her laptop, her brows furrowed. "Did you notice that?" Sarah asked in a low voice, her tone tinged with concern. Claudia's lips curved into a measured smile. "She's probably having a long day. No need to worry." But Sarah didn't look convinced. Neither, if she was honest with herself, did Claudia. As the jet ascended into the clouds, Claudia tried to shake off the growing tension. She had learned long ago to navigate subtle biases, but something about this encounter felt different. Lily's actions weren't merely curt, they felt pointed and intentional. Sarah leaned closer. "I overheard something earlier," she whispered. "Near the galley, she was talking about you with another flight attendant. It didn't sound friendly." Claudia's heart sank slightly, though her expression remained calm. "Thank you for telling me. I'll keep that in mind." For the remainder of the ascent, Claudia pretended to read her book, but her focus was elsewhere. The hum of the engines blended with fragments of Sarah's warning and the lingering image of Lily's cold demeanor. The tranquility Claudia had hoped for seemed to slip further out of reach. As the plane cruised at its assigned altitude, the atmosphere in the cabin grew oddly tense. Claudia tried to lose herself in her book, but the words seemed meaningless against the whirlwind of unease building within her. She glanced across the aisle at Sarah, who was now typing fervently on her laptop, occasionally shooting quick glances toward the galley. Lily reappeared in the aisle, balancing a tray of drinks with the precision of a seasoned professional. Her demeanor was polished as she addressed other passengers, offering them orange juice or green tea with a pleasant smile. Yet, when she reached Claudia's row, the smile wavered ever so slightly, replaced by a blank expression. "This is for you," Lily said curtly, placing the glass on Claudia's tray table with another sharp clink. "Thank you," Claudia replied, her voice steady, but her gaze searching Lily's face for any indication of what lay beneath the surface. Lily didn't respond. She adjusted the tray in her hands and moved briskly down the aisle, her posture rigid. Claudia could feel eyes on her, discreet but curious. Some passengers had noticed the subtle exchanges, their glances fleeting yet telling. Across the aisle, Sarah leaned toward her, her voice low. "She's doing it on purpose," Sarah said firmly. "There's no way that's just a bad day." Claudia offered a faint smile, but her thoughts were spinning. "Maybe it's nothing," she said softly, though the conviction in her words was lacking. Sarah wasn't convinced. "I've seen this before. I'm a human rights attorney, and I know what it looks like when someone's targeted." The phrase hung heavy in the air. Claudia sat back in her seat, her mind racing through possibilities. Was it her position as a prominent political figure? Was it the color of her skin? Or was this hostility simply personal? Minutes later, Lily returned, this time empty-handed. She stopped abruptly at Claudia's row, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Ms. Miller," Lily said, her voice carrying an edge that drew the attention of nearby passengers. "Are you sure you booked this flight properly?" The murmurs started immediately. Heads turned in Claudia's direction, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Claudia raised her eyes from her book, her demeanor calm, but her tone pointed. "I booked this flight through my office. My documentation was checked and confirmed when I boarded. Is there an issue?" Lily arched a brow, the faintest smirk playing at her lips. "I just want to make sure everyone on this flight is where they're supposed to be. Safety is our top priority." Claudia carefully set her book down, her gaze sharp but composed. "If you have any concerns, I suggest you direct them to the captain or a flight supervisor. I've provided everything necessary." For a moment, Lily hesitated, her smirk faltering. Then, with a slight shrug, she turned and disappeared into the galley. The tension in the cabin remained thick as whispers rippled among the passengers. Across the aisle, Sarah sat forward, her disapproval plain. "She has no right to question you like that," she said, her voice low but resolute. "It's fine," Claudia replied softly, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her frustration. "Let's see what happens next." Sarah wasn't ready to let it go. "This isn't fine," she insisted, "and I'm not just going to sit here and watch." A few minutes later, the quiet murmurs were interrupted by a soft chime, signaling the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected technical issue, we will be making an emergency landing at a nearby airport. Please remain seated and follow the instructions of the cabin crew." The announcement sent a ripple of unease through the cabin. Claudia glanced toward Sarah, whose expression was a mixture of concern and suspicion. "That's awfully coincidental," Sarah whispered. Claudia nodded faintly but said nothing, her mind now fully alert. She had flown countless times and knew such sudden changes were rare. The timing of this supposed technical issue felt suspicious. The plane began its descent, the whir of the engines growing louder as the cabin tilted slightly. Claudia tightened her grip on the armrests, her thoughts racing. When the plane touched down on the tarmac of a small, isolated airport, the silence was deafening. Outside the windows, the view was desolate, with no bustling terminals, no visible staff, just an expanse of empty concrete and a dilapidated building in the distance. Lily appeared again, her expression more rigid than ever. She walked directly to Claudia's row, her tone clipped as she spoke. "Ms. Miller, I need you to gather your belongings. Upon landing, you'll be required to disembark immediately." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Passengers around Claudia gasped, their shock evident. Sarah stood abruptly, her voice sharp. "You can't do that. She has every right to remain on this flight unless there's a valid reason to remove her." "This doesn't concern you," Lily snapped, her icy gaze cutting towards Sarah. Sarah stepped forward, her stance firm. "You're wrong. It concerns every single person here. Your actions are discriminatory and completely unacceptable." The murmurs among the passengers grew louder, some nodding in agreement while others exchanged uneasy glances. An older man seated nearby spoke up. "She's right," he said. "I don't see any reason for this. It's clear discrimination." For the first time, Lily seemed cornered, her confidence wavering under the growing scrutiny. But she stood her ground, motioning for Claudia to leave. Claudia rose slowly, her expression calm but resolute. "It's fine," she said, her voice steady. "I'll go. But this isn't over." Sarah slipped a small note onto Claudia's tray table as she passed. "Be careful," it read. "I'll testify for you if needed." With that, Claudia gathered her belongings and walked down the aisle, the weight of countless stares following her. As she stepped off the plane and onto the empty tarmac, a quiet determination settled within her. This wasn't just an insult. It was a deliberate attack, and she would ensure that those responsible would face the consequences. Claudia Miller stepped off the plane and onto the desolate tarmac, her heels clicking against the concrete in the oppressive silence. The sun blazed overhead, its heat beating down mercilessly, but it did little to warm the cold sting of humiliation she felt. Ahead, a small, crumbling building sat in stark isolation, its faded walls and cracked windows offering little comfort. Dragging her suitcase behind her, Claudia made her way toward the building. Each step echoed her resolve. She wasn't just a passenger who was unfairly targeted. She was someone who had faced adversity before and refused to be silenced. The building was even more dilapidated up close. Pushing open the creaky door, Claudia stepped into a dusty interior. A battered reception desk stood against one wall, its surface littered with scattered papers and cobwebs. The air smelled of mildew and neglect, but Claudia's focus was on finding a way to contact her team. She spotted an old rotary phone on the desk and picked it up, hoping against hope that it might still work. Pressing it to her ear, she was met with nothing but static. Frustrated but undeterred, Claudia set the receiver down and searched for alternatives. She checked her cell phone again, only to be met with the same frustrating message. No service. She frowned, her instincts telling her this wasn't a coincidence. Was the lack of signal merely due to the remote location, or was it something more deliberate? As the minutes ticked by, Claudia's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. A tall, kind-faced man stepped through the doorway, followed by a small group of curious onlookers. "You look like you've been through a tough journey," the man said, his voice steady but warm. "I'm Jamal, the local chief here. How can we help?" Claudia offered a faint smile, grateful for the kindness. "I was left here after an emergency landing. I need to contact my office, but there's no phone service." Jamal nodded thoughtfully, his expression one of understanding. "The signal here is weak, but we'll find a way to help you. For now, let us offer you some food and a place to rest." As the villagers guided Claudia to a small house nearby, their warmth began to ease the sting of her ordeal. Inside, an elderly woman gently tended to minor scratches on Claudia's legs, while a young girl, no older than 12, sat by her side. "You're Claudia Miller, aren't you?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Claudia smiled softly. "Yes, I am. I've seen you on TV," the girl continued, her eyes wide with admiration. "You're amazing. I want to grow up and be just like you." Claudia's smile deepened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. She reached out, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Thank you. And you already have everything you need to be strong and courageous. Believe in yourself and you can achieve anything." The girl's name was Asha, and her enthusiasm was infectious. She clasped Claudia's hand tightly. "But what happened? Why are you here all alone? Did something bad happen?" Claudia hesitated for a moment before nodding gently. "Yes, Asha, something unfair happened. But I believe in justice, and I won't let anyone get away with doing wrong." As night fell, the small house filled with the soft glow of an oil lamp. Claudia sat on the simple bed provided to her, her thoughts racing. The events of the flight played over and over in her mind. Lily's icy tone, the deliberate hostility, and the sudden emergency landing. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't a random incident. This was deliberate. Bookmark. Outside, the sound of crickets filled the air, blending with the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. But within Claudia's heart, there was no peace. She knew she couldn't stay here long. The situation demanded action. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the modest room's window, and Claudia awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. She joined the villagers for a simple breakfast, and their generous left her deeply moved. Jamal approached her after the meal, a hopeful expression on his face. "We've contacted someone in the nearest town who might be able to help. They can drive you to a place with a phone signal." Claudia's gratitude shone in her eyes. "Thank you, Jamal. Your kindness is something I'll never forget." Before she left, Asha ran up to her, her small hands clutching a handmade bracelet. "Here," she said, slipping it onto Claudia's wrist. "For good luck." Claudia knelt, embracing the girl. "Thank you, Asha. I'll wear it proudly." The villagers waved her off as she climbed into an old pickup truck, driven by a young man Jamal had arranged to help her. The ride was bumpy and dusty, the road winding through dense forests and rugged terrain. Yet Claudia's resolve only grew stronger with every passing mile. When they finally reached the small town, Claudia's phone buzzed to life. The signal bar appeared, bringing a flood of relief. She immediately dialed her office, her heart pounding as the call connected. "Miss Miller," came the voice of her assistant Marcus. "We've been so worried. What happened?" "I'll explain everything when I'm back," Claudia replied, her tone steady. "But first, I need you to prepare for a press conference. This isn't just person, it's bigger than me, and we can't let it go unchallenged." Marcus hesitated for only a moment before responding. "Understood. I'll get everything ready." As Claudia hung up, she looked out at the horizon, the sunlight breaking through scattered clouds. She wasn't just returning to her life, she was preparing for a battle. The injustice she had faced wasn't just hers to bear, it was a symbol of the countless others who endured similar treatment in silence. But Claudia had no intention of staying silent. She tightened the bracelet Asha had given her, feeling its comforting weight on her wrist. This is only the beginning, she thought, her eyes gleaming with determination. Claudia Miller arrived back in Washington late the next evening, stepping off the plane with a single suitcase in hand and a fire in her eyes. Her assistant, Marcus, was waiting for her at the airport, accompanied by a member of her legal team. Their expressions, a mix of concern and determination, mirrored her own resolve. "We've set up the press conference," Marcus informed her as they got into the car. "The media's already caught wind of what happened. Social media's been buzzing about it ever since one of the passengers uploaded a video of your removal from the flight." Claudia raised an eyebrow. "A video?" "Yes," Marcus said. "A fellow passenger captured everything. It's gone viral. People are outraged at how you were treated." "Good," Claudia replied, her voice steady. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about standing up for everyone who's ever faced this kind of injustice." The car sped toward Claudia's office, the streets of Washington illuminated by a cascade of city lights. As they arrived, a small group of supporters had already gathered outside, holding signs that read "Justice for Claudia" and "End Discrimination Now." Inside the office, the atmosphere was electric. Members of her team were buzzing with activity, making calls, drafting statements, and preparing for the press conference. Claudia wasted no time meeting with her legal advisors to review the evidence. The video Marcus had mentioned was damning. It showed Lily's interactions with Claudia in crystal clear detail, from her curt remarks to the way she ordered Claudia off the plane. The caption accompanying the video read, "Why is this happening in 2024?" Claudia's attorney, Laura Stevenson, a seasoned expert in civil rights law, set the phone down after reviewing the clip. "This is powerful evidence," she said. "It clearly shows discriminatory behavior. But we need more context. Were there any witnesses who spoke up?" "Yes," Marcus interjected. "A lawyer named Sarah Daniels, who was seated across from Claudia. She's already agreed to testify if needed." "Perfect," Laura said, jotting notes onto her tablet. "Between her testimony and the video, we have a strong foundation for a case." That night, as Claudia prepared for the press conference, she reflected on the events that had unfolded. It wasn't the first time she had faced prejudice, but it was perhaps the most blatant and public example of it. She tightened her resolve. "This isn't just about me," she whispered to herself. "This is about making sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." The next morning, the press conference took place on the steps outside Claudia's office. Reporters and cameras filled the space, their lenses trained on the podium where she was about to speak. Claudia stepped forward, her navy suit crisp and her expression calm but resolute. The crowd hushed as she began. "Good morning, everyone," she started, her voice carrying clearly over the murmurs. "Yesterday I experienced something no one, absolutely no one, should have to endure." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the gathered reporters and supporters. "On a flight to the Maldives, I was singled out, humiliated, and ultimately removed from the plane without cause. What I experienced was more than personal. It was an act of discrimination, and it reflects a systemic issue that countless others face every day." A ripple of agreement moved through the crowd. The microphones in front of her captured every word, broadcasting them live to millions. Bookmark. "This is not just about one flight," Claudia continued. "It's about how we treat each other in our shared spaces. It's about standing up to those who abuse their power. And I intend to fight this not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt voiceless in the face of injustice." The hashtag Justice for Claudia trended within hours, sparking a wave of solidarity across social media. Stories of similar incidents began to surface, with people sharing their own experiences of discrimination in service industries. But not everyone was supportive. The airline issued a brief statement, claiming the removal was a routine safety decision and denying any discriminatory intent. "They're trying to sweep this under the rug," Marcus said angrily as the statement flashed across the TV screen in Claudia's office later that day. "Let them try," Claudia replied, her tone firm. "We have evidence, witnesses, and the truth on our side. They can't hide from this." Within days, the situation escalated further. Investigative journalists uncovered emails suggesting that Lily's actions weren't isolated. The correspondents hinted at pressure from higher-ups within the airline to ensure Claudia Miller didn't cause any disruptions on the flight. "This goes deeper than we thought," Laura said as she reviewed the findings. "If we can prove a coordinated effort, this isn't just a discrimination case, it's a conspiracy." Claudia nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we'll expose it all." The legal team moved quickly, filing a formal lawsuit against the airline. The case alleged discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power, with Claudia seeking not only justice for herself but systemic changes within the airline industry. Meanwhile, Sarah Daniels, the lawyer from the flight, stepped forward to share her account publicly. In a televised interview, she described everything she had witnessed. "She was polite, composed, and professional," Sarah said. "There was no reason for her to be treated the way she was. What I saw wasn't just unprofessional, it was discriminatory, and I couldn't stay silent." Sarah's testimony added fuel to the fire, as did the growing chorus of voices from others who had faced similar treatment. The airline's PR team scrambled to control the damage, but every move they made seemed only to inflame the situation further. As Claudia's legal battle gained traction, she found herself at the center of a movement. What had started as a personal fight had become a rallying cry for justice, equality, and accountability. And Claudia was ready for the fight. Claudia sat in her office, her gaze fixed on the glowing city skyline outside the window. The press conference had been a resounding success, but the battle was far from over. Her legal team was preparing for a long, grueling fight, and the weight of her role as a symbol for change pressed heavily on her shoulders. The ringing of her office phone snapped her back to the present. Marcus's voice came through, sharp with urgency. "Claudia, another passenger from the flight, has come forward. They've sent us a video from their S. It captures even more of what happened," he said. "Forward it to Laura," Claudia replied, her tone calm but resolute. "Every piece of evidence matters." She hung up and leaned back in her chair, her thoughts spinning. The airline had already doubled down on its statement, insisting that Lily had acted alone and that her removal was a precautionary safety measure. But Claudia knew better. The emails unearthed by journalists hinted at an organized effort to discredit her, and every new piece of evidence brought them closer to proving it. The following day, Claudia met with her team in their conference room. Laura stood at the head of the table, laying out their legal strategy. "We'll focus on 3 key points," Laura began, her voice steady. "First, Lily's discriminatory behavior. Second, the suspicious timing of the emergency landing. Third, the internal emails suggest pressure from higher-ups to target Claudia." Marcus chimed in. "Sarah Daniels has agreed to testify, and we've got 2 other passengers willing to provide statements." Laura nodded. "Good. The more witnesses we have, the stronger our case becomes." Claudia listened intently, her resolve strengthening with each word. This wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about holding the airline accountable and setting a precedent for others. The day of the first court filing, the media frenzy reached new heights. Reporters camped outside Claudia's office, eager for updates. Inside, her team worked tirelessly to ensure every detail of their case was airtight. "Claudia," Laura said, stepping into her office, "we've just received a critical piece of information." "What is it?" Claudia asked, sitting up straight. "A flight attendant who worked alongside Lily has come forward," Laura said. "She claims that Lily was acting under direct orders from an airline executive." Claudia's heart raced. "Can we get her on record?" "She's hesitant," Laura admitted. "She's afraid of retaliation. But she's agreed to meet with us in private to discuss what she knows." Later that evening, in a discreet meeting room at a downtown law office, Claudia and Laura sat across from the flight attendant, a young woman named Dana. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a cup of tea. "I don't want to lose my job," Dana began, her voice barely above a whisper. "You won't," Claudia assured her, her tone gentle but firm. "We'll protect you. But the truth is crucial here." Dana took a deep breath, then An began to speak. "Before the flight, I overheard Lily talking to one of the senior managers. They told her to keep an eye on you and to report any minor issues immediately. It was clear they didn't want you on that plane." "Did they explain why?" Laura asked, her pen poised over a notepad. Dana shook her head. "No, but it was obvious they had some kind of agenda." Lily didn't question it, she just followed their instructions. Claudia exchanged a glance with Laura, and her suspicions were confirmed. "Would you be willing to testify to this in court?" Laura asked. Dana hesitated, her fear evident. "I'll think about it. I just need time." As Dana left the room, Claudia felt a surge of both frustration and determination. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still a long way to go. Back at her office, Claudia gathered her team. "This is bigger than I thought," she said. "It's not just about me. It's about a system that allows discrimination and abuse of power to thrive. We're going to expose it, no matter what it takes." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal filings, media appearances, and public support. The hashtag Justice for Claudia continued to trend, with countless people sharing their own stories of discrimination. One evening, as Claudia was reviewing documents in her office, she received a call from Sarah Daniels. "Claudia, I wanted to thank you," Sarah said. "Your courage has inspired so many people, including me. Standing up for you on that flight was one of the most important decisions I've ever made." Claudia smiled, her exhaustion momentarily lifting. "Thank you, Sarah. Your support means more than you know." But not everyone was supportive. The airline's legal team launched a smear campaign, trying to paint Claudia as an entitled politician seeking attention. News outlets debated the case endlessly. with some questioning whether Claudia was overreacting. Through it all, Claudia remained steadfast. "I'm not doing this for attention," she told a reporter during an interview. "I'm doing this because no one, no matter who they are, should have to endure the kind of treatment I faced. This is about justice, plain and simple." As the first court hearing approached, the pressure mounted, but Claudia refused to back down. She had faced challenges before, and she knew that standing up for what was right often came at a cost. "This is only the beginning," she told her team during a late-night meeting. "We're not just fighting for this case, we're fighting for change." And she meant every word. The day of the first court hearing dawned crisp and cold, with a buzz of anticipation in the air. Claudia Miller, dressed in a tailored black suit, stepped out of a car and into a sea of flashing cameras and cheering supporters. Signs reading "Justice for Claudia" and "End Discrimination" now waved above the crowd as chants filled the space outside the courthouse. Claudia's legal team, led by the formidable Laura Stevenson, flanked her as she made her way to the steps. Her expression was calm but resolute, her gaze steady. This wasn't just a fight for herself. It was a stand against a system that had wronged so many. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. The airline's legal team sat at one table, their confident postures betrayed by the nervous glances they exchanged. On Claudia's side, her team exuded quiet determination. The first order of business was presenting the evidence. Laura stood confidently, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, we are here today not just to seek justice for Ms. Miller, but to hold accountable a corporation that allowed blatant discrimination to occur unchecked." The first piece of evidence was the now viral video recorded by a fellow passenger. As the footage played on a large screen, the courtroom fell silent. Lily's sharp, dismissive tone echoed through the room as she spoke to Claudia. "Are you sure you booked this flight properly?" The video captured the looks of discomfort and disbelief on the faces of other passengers, as well as Sarah Daniels's vocal defense of Claudia. When it ended, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Next came Sarah herself, who took the stand with a composed but fiery demeanor. "What I witnessed on that flight was more than just unprofessional conduct," Sarah testified. "It was targeted discrimination. Claudia Miller was treated differently from every other passenger on that plane, and there was no justification for it." The airline's lawyers attempted to paint Lily's actions as standard procedure, but their argument quickly crumbled under the weight of additional testimony. One of the most compelling moments came when Dana, the hesitant flight attendant who had approached Claudia's team, decided to testify. "I was there," Dana said, her voice trembling but firm. "Before the flight, I overheard Lily being instructed by a senior executive to keep an eye on Ms. Miller and to report any issues immediately. It was clear they wanted her off the plane. Did they explain why?" Laura asked. "No," Dana replied, shaking her head. "But it wasn't a safety issue. It felt personal." The courtroom buzzed with shock. This was the turning point Claudia's team had been waiting for. Proof that the incident wasn't just an isolated act of bias, but part of a larger, more insidious plan. Claudia watched as the airline's legal team scrambled to regain control of the narrative. They attempted to dismiss Dana's testimony as hearsay, but the damage was done. The truth was becoming undeniable. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy continued to grow. News outlets dissected every detail of the case, while social media erupted with debates and support for Claudia. The hashtag #JusticeForClaudia was joined by others, including Stop Discrimination and Accountability Now. In interviews, Claudia remained steadfast in her message. "This isn't just about me," she told one reporter. "This is about creating a society where no one has to face this kind of treatment. We need accountability, and we need change." Meanwhile, investigative journalists continued digging into the airline's internal operations. What they uncovered added even more fuel to the fire. Leaked emails from an executive named Andrew Collins, a high-ranking official at the airline. In one email, Collins wrote, "Make sure Miller doesn't cause any disruptions. She's a liability we don't need right now." Another email suggested that the airline had been under pressure from political figures who opposed Claudia's work and sought to discredit her. When these revelations hit the headlines, public outrage reached a boiling point. The airline's PR team released another statement, this time distancing themselves from Collins and claiming his actions were unauthorized. But the damage was irreversible. Claudia's team wasted no time incorporating the new evidence into their case. At a late-night strategy meeting, Laura laid out their next steps. "We have a clear pattern here," she said. "Discriminatory behavior by Lily, pressure from senior executives, and now direct involvement from Collins. This isn't just a case of bias, it's a conspiracy." Claudia nodded, her determination unshaken. "Then we'll hold them all accountable," she said. As the case gained momentum, Claudia became a symbol of resilience for countless people. Letters and emails poured into her office from supporters sharing their own stories of injustice. One letter, written by a young woman named Maya, stood out. "Your courage has inspired me to stand up for myself," Maya wrote. "For years, I've stayed silent about the discrimination I've faced at work. But because of you, I've decided to file a formal complaint. Thank you for showing me that our voices matter." Claudia read the letter aloud to her team during a rare, quiet moment in the office. It served as a powerful reminder of why this fight was so important. The airline, meanwhile, found itself in an increasingly precarious position. Public opinion had turned against them, and several advocacy groups announced boycotts of the airline's frequent flyers and issued statements of solidarity with Claudia. Despite the mounting pressure, Claudia knew the fight wasn't over. The courtroom battles were just beginning, and the stakes were higher than ever. But she was ready. "This isn't just about one case," she told her team. "This is about setting a precedent. If we win, it will send a message that discrimination and abuse of power will not be tolerated anywhere." The room filled with quiet nods of agreement. They all knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were united in their purpose. As Claudia prepared for the next phase of the trial, she took a moment to reflect. The journey had been grueling, but every step brought them closer to justice, not just for, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel powerless. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial's climax, with rows of reporters, spectators, and activists filling every available seat. Claudia Miller sat at the plaintiff's table, her presence calm but resolute. Across the aisle, the airline's legal team looked visibly tense. The weight of mounting evidence and public scrutiny hung heavy in the air. Laura Stevenson, Claudia's lead attorney, opened the proceedings with a powerful statement. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and firm, "this case is not just about Claudia Miller. It's about holding accountable a corporation that abused its authority to discriminate and silence someone who had done nothing wrong. The evidence will show that this was no accident. It was a calculated act of bias and systemic abuse." The first witness called to the stand was Sarah Daniels. Confident and composed, Sarah recounted the events of the flight in vivid detail. "From the moment Miss Claudia Miller boarded, she was treated differently," Sarah testified. "Lily, the flight attendant, was polite to every other passenger but hostile to Claudia. It was obvious to everyone around us." The airline's lawyer tried to rattle Sarah during cross-examination, suggesting she might have misinterpreted Lily's behavior. Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm a human rights attorney," she said firmly. "I know discrimination when I see it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate." Next came Dana, the whistleblower flight attendant. Though visibly nervous, she delivered a damning account of the internal pressure placed on Lily before the flight. "I overheard a senior executive telling Lily to watch Miller closely," Dana said, her voice shaking. "It was clear they wanted her off the plane for reasons that had nothing to do with safety." The airline's legal team attempted to discredit Dana, claiming she had an ulterior motive for testifying, but Laura swiftly countered. "Miss Dana, why did you decide to come forward?" Laura asked. "Because what happened was wrong," Dana replied, "and I couldn't stay silent knowing the truth." Then came the pièce de résistance, the leaked emails from Andrew Collins, the senior executive whose words had ignited public outrage. One email, displayed on a large screen for the courtroom to see, read, "We can't afford Miller on this flight. Handle it quietly." The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Laura let the words hang in the air before addressing the judge. "This email, Your Honor, is proof of intent. It shows that Claudia Miller wasn't just a passenger. They saw her as a problem that needed to be eliminated." The airline's defense struggled to recover. Their claims of safety concerns rang hollow against the overwhelming evidence. The emails painted a clear picture of an orchestrated effort to remove Claudia, and public sentiment outside the courtroom was already turning against them. In a final, desperate move, the airline's attorney called Lily to the stand. Dressed in a somber black dress, Lily appeared visibly uncomfortable as she faced questioning. "Miss Lily," the defense began, "did you act alone in removing Miss Miller from the flight?" "I was following orders," Lily admitted, her voice subdued. "But I didn't realize how it would escalate." Laura seized the moment during cross-examination. "Miss Lily," she said, her tone measured but firm, "when you followed these so-called orders, did you ever question why Miss Miller was being singled out?" Lily hesitated, then shook her head. "No." "Did you believe she posed any safety risk?" Lily's face flushed. "No, she didn't." "Then why did you act against her?" Laura pressed. "I was afraid of losing my job," Lily admitted, her voice barely audible. The courtroom fell silent. The admission hung heavy, a testament to the toxic environment fostered by those in power. In her closing argument, Laura addressed the court with conviction. "This is not just a case of one woman's mistreatment," she said. "This is about a culture of fear and discrimination that is enabled by those at the top. Today, we have the chance to send a message that no one, no matter their position, is above accountability." The jury deliberated for hours, and the tension was unbearable. Claudia waited in a private room with her team, trying to maintain her composure as the minutes dragged on. Finally, the court reconvened. The jury filed back into their seats, and the four-persons stood to deliver the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant at unguilty discrimination, harassment, and abuse of power." The room erupted in murmurs, but Claudia's expression remained steady. Relief and vindication washed over her, but she knew this victory was only part of a much larger fight. The judge ordered the airline to pay a substantial fine and implement sweeping reforms, including mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees. Andrew Collins and other executives involved were placed under further investigation, and Lily was terminated from her position. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of supporters cheered as Claudia emerged. Cameras flashed, and chants of "Justice for Claudia" filled the air. Claudia stepped up to the podium, her voice ringing with determination. "Today, justice has been served," she said. "But our work is far from over. This is a victory not just for my butt, but for everyone who has ever faced injustice. Together, we will continue to fight for a world where no one has to endure what I did." The crowd roared, their applause echoing down the street. Claudia stood tall, her heart swelling with gratitude and purpose. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus approached her with a wide grin. "We did it," he said. Claudia smiled softly. "We did. But now, we need to make sure this never happens again." Her fight for justice was far from over. This victory was just the beginning of a much larger journey. The days following the trial were a whirlwind of activity and emotions. The courtroom victory was splashed across headlines nationwide, with phrases like, "A landmark case against discrimination and justice for Claudia Miller sparks nationwide change," dominating news cycles. Support poured in from all corners of the country, and the hashtag "Justice for Claudia" continued to trend on social media. But while the verdict marked a personal triumph for Claudia, it also symbolized a broader call to action. The systemic issues exposed during the trial couldn't be ignored, and Claudia was determined to leverage the momentum to create lasting change. Her first step was to formalize the nonprofit she had been quietly planning since the ordeal began. She named it Equity for All, a fitting tribute to the cause that had united so many. The organization's mission was clear: to fight discrimination, advocate for human rights, and support those who had been silenced or marginalized. At the official launch event, held in a packed auditorium, Claudia stood before an audience of activists, community leaders, and everyday citizens. Her voice was steady as she addressed the crowd. "This is more than an organization," she said. "It's a movement. Together, we will ensure that justice is not just a word, but a reality for everyone." The room erupted into applause, and Claudia felt a surge of pride. The fight wasn't over, but this was a critical step forward. Meanwhile, the airline found itself grappling with the fallout from the trial. The financial penalties imposed by the court were significant, but the damage to their reputation was even greater. Advocacy groups announced boycotts, and public trust in the company plummeted. Under immense pressure, the airline's board of directors announced sweeping reforms. Executives implicated in the case, including Andrew Collins, were terminated. The company also pledged to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training for its employees, revise its policies, and establish an independent oversight committee to handle complaints. But for many, these changes felt like too little, too late. Other airlines, fearing similar scandals, began preemptively revising their own policies and reaching out to Claudia's team for guidance. "We want to be part of the solution," said a spokesperson for a competing airline. "The case of Claudia Miller has opened our eyes to the urgent need for systemic change." As the public rallied behind her, Claudia used her newfound platform to amplify the voices of others. Letters and messages continued to pour in, each telling a story of injustice or discrimination. One letter, written by a single mother named Teresa, struck a chord with Claudia. "Miss Miller," Teresa wrote, "I've faced discrimination at work for years but was too afraid to speak up. Watching you fight inspired me to finally file a complaint. Thank you for giving people like me hope." Claudia read the letter aloud during a team meeting, her voice filled with emotion. "This is why we fight," she said. "For people like Teresa, who deserve to be heard and respected." Her organization began working on a campaign called Voices for Change, which aimed to collect and amplify stories of injustice. The campaign's website allowed individuals to share their experiences anonymously, creating a powerful tapestry of voices demanding accountability. At the same time, Claudia and her team pushed for legislative reform. Partnering with lawmakers, they drafted a bill called the Equity and Accountability Act, which sought to strengthen protections against discrimination in service industries. "This bill isn't just about punishment," Claudia explained during a televised interview. "It's about prevention. It's about creating systems that ensure fairness and equality for everyone." Claudia's fight didn't stop at national borders. Her story resonated with people around the world, and invitations to speak at international conferences began pouring in. She accepted an invitation to the United Nations Human Rights Summit, where she delivered a powerful speech that drew a standing ovation. "Discrimination knows no borders," Claudia said to the assembly, "but neither does justice. Together, we can create a world where dignity and equality are not privileges but rights for all." The summit became a turning point in Claudia's journey. Her organization partnered with global human rights groups to launch the Global Equity Initiative, a collaborative effort to address systemic injustices worldwide. In Kenya, Claudia reconnected with a familiar face. Asha, the young girl who had given her a bracelet at the village near the isolated airport, had grown into a determined young woman. Inspired by Claudia, Asha had become a lawyer working for an NGO focused on women's rights. "Because of you, I found my purpose," Asha said, her eyes shining with pride. Claudia placed a hand on Asha's shoulder, her voice filled with warmth. "No, Asha. You found your own strength. I'm just proud to see you use it." Back in the United States, Claudia's nonprofit grew rapidly. Equity for All established community centers in major cities, offering free legal counseling and workshops on anti-discrimination laws. The Voices for Change campaign became a national movement, empowering individuals to speak up and demand accountability. One of the nonprofit's biggest achievements was the successful passage of the Equity and Accountability Act, which was signed into law at a ceremony attended by lawmakers, activists, and community leaders. Claudia stood beside the president as the legislation was finalized, her heart swelling with pride. "This isn't just a victory for the law," Claudia said during her speech. "It's a victory for humanity, and it's proof that when we stand together, we can create real change." One evening, as Claudia sat in her office, she received a video call from Asha. The young lawyer wanted to share news of a major legal victory her NGO had achieved. "Miss Claudia," Asha said, her excitement palpable, "we just won a case that will protect thousands of women from workplace discrimination." "That's incredible, Asha," Claudia replied, her smile wide. "You're making such a difference." "Because of you," Asha said. As the call ended, Claudia leaned back in her chair, gazing out at the city lights. She thought about how far she had come, from being humiliated on a flight to leading a global movement for justice. "They thought they could silence me," she murmured to herself. But they didn't realize they were igniting something much bigger. With her nonprofit thriving, new legislative efforts underway, and a global network of allies, Claudia knew her work was far from finished. The fight for justice was ongoing, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Claudia Miller's fight for justice had transcended borders, becoming a beacon of hope for people worldwide. Her story wasn't just about one individual's battle against discrimination. It had become a movement to address systemic injustices across industries and cultures. The nonprofit Equity for All flourished, with chapters established in over 15 countries within the first year. Each chapter tailored its efforts to the unique challenges faced in its region, from combating racial bias in hiring practices to addressing gender inequality in public services. One of the most impactful initiatives was the Global Equity Network, a platform Claudia spearheaded to connect human rights organizations worldwide. The platform allowed advocates to share resources, strategies, and success stories, fostering a collaborative approach to dismantling discrimination. Claudia's efforts caught the attention of international leaders, earning her an invitation to the World Justice Forum in The Hague. Standing before an audience of policymakers, activists, and academics, she delivered a rousing speech about the need for systemic reform. Justice is not an abstract concept, Claudia said, her voice resonating through the hall. It is a living, breathing principle that must be upheld in our laws, our institutions, and our daily interactions. When we fail to act, we fail humanity itself. Her words were met with a standing ovation, solidifying her role as a global advocate for equity and human rights. The forum also opened new doors for collaboration. Claudia's team began working with international organizations to implement anti-discrimination training programs in workplaces and schools. One pilot program in South Africa, aimed at educating teenagers about their rights, became a model for similar efforts in other countries. Claudia firmly believed that education was the cornerstone of lasting change. Under her leadership, Equity for All launched the Rights and Respect curriculum, a program designed to teach young people about equality, empathy, and their rights. The program gained traction quickly, with schools across the United States and Europe integrating it into their curriculums. Teachers reported that students who participated became more confident in standing up against injustice, both for themselves and others. At a school in Chicago, Claudia met a group of students who had embraced the program. One girl, Maria, approached Claudia shyly but determinedly. "Miss Miller," Maria began, her voice trembling slightly, "because of your story, I told my teacher about something unfair that happened to my friend. She got help, and now everything is better." Claudia knelt to meet Maria's gaze, her heart swelling with pride. "You're a hero. Speaking up takes courage, and you made a difference. Never forget that." Moments like these reminded Claudia why she fought so hard. Back at home, Claudia focused on deepening connections within her community. She hosted forums where people from diverse backgrounds could share their experiences and learn from one another. At one event in Atlanta, a young man named Jamal shared his story of facing discrimination at a high-profile tech company. "They tried to make me feel like I didn't belong," Jamal said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But seeing what you've done, Claudia, gave me the strength to fight back." Claudia responded with empathy and encouragement. "Your story matters, Jamal," she said, "and your courage will inspire others to stand up as well." These forums became a cornerstone of Equity for All's work, fostering solidarity and empowering individuals to become advocates for change. Bookmark. The Equity and Accountability Act, the landmark legislation Claudia had helped draft, was already making waves. The law introduced stricter penalties for discriminatory practices in the service industry, as well as a framework for holding organizations accountable. One of its most significant provisions was the establishment of a federal oversight committee to investigate claims of discrimination. Within months of its creation, the committee had already resolved dozens of cases, providing justice for individuals who might otherwise have been ignored. Claudia was invited to testify before Congress about the law's impact. Her testimony was both inspiring and pragmatic, emphasizing the importance of vigilance in maintaining progress. "This law is a step forward," Claudia told the committee, "but it's only a step. We must remain committed to addressing the root causes of discrimination if we want lasting change. As the months passed, Claudia's influence continued to grow. She was invited to mentor young activists, sharing her insights and experiences. One of her mentees, a college student named Priya from India, became a standout leader in her own right. Miss Miller, Priya said during a virtual meeting, "Your fight taught me that even when the odds are against us, we can create change. I've started a campaign at my university to address gender bias, and it's already making a difference." Claudia smiled warmly. "Priya, you are proof that change is possible. Keep going, you're making the world better." These relationships fueled Claudia's determination. Every story of impact, every victory won by those she inspired, reinforced her belief in the power of collective action. Despite her successes, Claudia remained focused on the work ahead. She and her team began developing new initiatives, including a partnership with tech companies to combat algorithmic bias and a scholarship program for marginalized students pursuing careers in law and social justice. One evening, as she reviewed proposals in her office, Claudia received a call from Asha, the young lawyer from Kenya. "Miss Claudia," Asha said, her voice filled with excitement, "I just wanted you to know that I've started my own nonprofit. We're helping women in rural communities gain access to legal resources." Claudia felt a swell of pride. "That's incredible, Asha. You're carrying the torch and making such a difference." As their call ended, Claudia looked out at the Washington skyline, the city lights twinkling against the night. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From humiliation on a plane to leading a global movement for justice. "They thought they could silence me," she thought, "but they only gave me a louder voice." As Claudia Miller's movement gained momentum, it became clear that her journey wasn't just about one person's fight for justice. It was about empowering others to recognize their worth, to speak up, and to demand fairness in every corner of society. Her story had become a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that one voice could spark a movement. On the one-year anniversary of the court victory, Claudia hosted a gala in Washington, D.C., to celebrate the milestones achieved by Equity for All. The event was attended by activists, lawmakers, and supporters from around the world, all united in their commitment to advancing justice. Claudia stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding yet warm. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "A year ago, I stood in a courtroom to fight against an injustice that should never have happened," she said. "But today, we're not just looking back at what was wrong, we're celebrating what we've made right." Her words drew applause, but it was the stories of those impacted by her work that truly resonated. One of the evening speakers was Teresa, the single mother who had written Claudia a letter after the trial. Teresa shared her story of standing up to workplace discrimination and winning her case with the help of Equity for All. "I thought I was alone," Teresa said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But Claudia's courage gave me the strength to fight. Now, I know that I deserve respect, and I want to help others find their voice too." The room erupted into applause, with Claudia leading the standing ovation. As Claudia reflected on her journey, she realized the importance of documenting her experiences for future generations. With the encouragement of her team, she wrote a memoir titled Unyielding: A Journey to Justice. The book became an instant bestseller, praised for its raw honesty and inspirational message. It wasn't just a recounting of events, it was a guide for anyone seeking to challenge injustice. In one of the book's most poignant passages, Claudia wrote, "They tried to silence me, but their actions only made me louder. Justice isn't a gift, it's something we must fight for, every day, for everyone." Her words resonated with readers around the world, sparking book clubs, discussion panels, and online campaigns inspired by her story. One of the many letters Claudia received after the book's release was from a 10-year-old girl named Sofia in Brazil. "Dear Miss Miller," the letter began, written in neat, childish handwriting. "Your story made me feel brave. I want to help people feel respected and loved, just like you." Claudia kept Sofia's letter on her desk as a constant reminder of why she did this work. The thought of inspiring someone so young filled her with renewed energy. The success of Equity for All and the passage of the Equity and Accountability Act inspired Claudia to take her efforts even further. She announced the creation of the Global Equity Leadership Summit, an annual event bringing together advocates, policymakers, and thought leaders to share strategies and build alliances. The inaugural summit was held in Geneva, Switzerland, with representatives from over 50 countries in attendance. Claudia delivered the keynote address, her voice filled with conviction. "Justice is a universal language," she said. "When one of us is silenced, we are all diminished. But when we stand together, we amplify the voices that need to be heard." The summit resulted in actionable commitments, from corporate pledges to improve workplace equity to international partnerships for combating discrimination. Despite her numerous accomplishments, Claudia remained grounded. She often said that the true measure of her success wasn't in the accolades, but in the lives she had touched. One late evening, as she worked alone in her office, Marcus walked in with a folder of new case files. "More requests for help," he said, setting the folder on her desk. "It seems your work has only just begun." Claudia smiled, flipping through the pages. Each file represented a person seeking justice, a reminder that her fight was far from over. "Good," she said. "The more people we help, the closer we get to a world where everyone is treated with dignity." Claudia's story continued to inspire people from all walks of life. Her name became synonymous with resilience and equity, and her work laid the foundation for systemic changes that would benefit generations to come. On the second anniversary of her courtroom victory, Claudia found herself back on the stage, this time at a university commencement ceremony. Standing before a crowd of graduates, she shared the lesson that had guided her journey. "Never underestimate the power of your voice," she told the graduates. "Even when it feels small, even when it shakes, it has the potential to create waves of change. And when we join our voices together, we can move mountains." The crowd erupted into applause, and Claudia felt a surge of hope for the future. These young people were the next generation of changemakers, and she was honored to play a part in shaping their journeys. That evening, Claudia returned to her office, the city lights twinkling beyond the window. On her desk sat a stack of letters from supporters, a copy of her memoir, and a framed photo of her and Asha from their reunion in Kenya. As she sipped her tea, Claudia allowed herself a rare moment of quiet pride. The road ahead was long, but she knew she was ready to keep walking it. "They thought they could silence me," she reflected, her gaze steady. "But they didn't realize they were giving me a platform to be heard." With that, Claudia turned back to her work, her resolve unwavering. Her fight for justice was far from over, but she welcomed the challenge, because justice, she believed, was worth every step. The story of Claudia Miller is not just one of triumph over discrimination. It's a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and the unwavering belief that justice must prevail. Claudia's journey, from the humiliation she endured on that fateful flight to her emergence as a global advocate for equity, teaches us that even in our darkest moments, we can find the strength to fight for what is right. This tale reminds us of the importance of speaking up, not just for ourselves, but for those who might not have the ability or platform to do so. It reveals the systemic issues that can perpetuate injustice and the extraordinary power of collective action in dismantling those systems. Claudia's relentless pursuit of fairness demonstrates that change is possible when we refuse to accept inequality as inevitable. Her work through Equity for All, her legislation initiatives, and her global advocacy show how one individual's determination can inspire a movement that transcends borders and generations. Claudia's legacy is a reminder that every voice matters, and every step taken toward justice leaves an indelible mark on the world. If there is one lesson to take away, it's this: never underestimate the impact of standing up for what's right. Whether you're fighting for your own dignity or for a cause bigger than yourself, your voice has the power to create waves of change. If this story moves you, we want to hear your thoughts. Was it inspiring? If you thought the story was good, comment with a 1. If you thought it was amazing, comment with a 2. And don't forget to share your own stories of resilience and justice. Join the conversation in the comments below and let us know what you think about Claudia's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the meaningful stories we'll share next. Together, we can continue to inspire and fight for a better future.